From the campus of Yale University, this is Business Talk with Jim Campbell, nationally syndicated across the country on the Biz Talk Radio Network and coming to you from our flagship stations, Yale Radio WYBC and 1490 AM WGCH Greenwich. All talk and all business, 60 minutes of radio with leading figures from the world of business along with the business of politics and sports. Is Donald Trump dangerously mentally ill? Did Brett Kavanaugh lie before the Senate Judiciary Committee in his recent hearings to become a Supreme Court nominee? Our guest thinks so. Dr. Bandy Lee, assistant clinical professor in law. She's taught at the law school at Yale for 15 years. She's also a professor of psychiatry in the Yale School of Medicine, Yale being one of our flagship stations for the show as well. She's worked in several maximum security prisons, co-founded Yale's Violence and Health Study Group, leads a violence prevention collaborators group for the World Health Organization, the WHO, and she's one of the leaders of Duty to Warn, a group of mental health experts who banded together to warn of the dangerous case of Donald Trump. And she's the editor of The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, 27 psychiatrists and mental health experts assess a president, for which she's been on the show twice, I believe. Welcome, Bandy.
Thank you for having me back.
Thanks for coming in studio, by the way, as well. First off, let me ask, what has been the impact of this on your career and any safety issues or whatever? Because you've got a pretty big brand name now as the leader of this movement.
Yes. First of all, let me distinguish myself from the group that is called Duty to Warn. I myself am founder and leader of the National Coalition of Concerned Mental Health Experts.
Okay.
And that's a professional group. Our website is dangerouscase.org. In terms of its impact on my career, first of all, let me say that everything I say here is of my own opinion, not representing my institutions. I must say, in private, this whole movement has gained a great deal of respect and support from my colleagues, from the public, especially the public, and it has had an unexpected positive influence. In terms of public appearances, of course, we've gotten backlash from the American Psychiatric Association. Various, but fewer, professionals have called us out.
Is that for the Goldwater rule that they say you violated?
That's correct, yes. Even though we didn't violate the Goldwater rule as it's written and originally interpreted. Mm-hmm. The APA actually changed its interpretation of the Goldwater rule in order to silence the profession. And we are actually opposed to that. In fact, silence as well as active cooperation on the part of physicians of governments, of destructive governments, can be harmful.
Has it impacted, has Yale been bothered at all by it?
Of course, I've... because I love my institution and alma mater, I've been feeling very apologetic about my activities, but they unexpectedly have been supportive. Publicly, they made a statement that separating themselves from my views, but privately, they've been supportive in every way. I understand the difficult position I've put them in and appreciate that they have supported my right to free speech.
Let me ask you, what made you do this, and were you an anti-Trump guy and that led you into doing this?
No, I am not a political person at all, have never been. I've never enlisted with any political party or supported any party. In fact, I was totally removed from it in a sense, that I've been involved mostly in global health. I got involved in this because my area of violence prevention prompted a bunch of people to contact me the morning after the election. In fact, early in the morning, I started getting flooded with phone calls and emails about people who were afraid of the violence that was to come. And in fact, one of the reasons why despite the near consensus on the part of the psychiatric community that very few people have come forth, is because of the fear of violence to themselves, that they would be subject to the very violence that they're warning
And
against.
violence, you mean by Trump supporters, or?
Trump supporters, Trump himself. My colleagues have been afraid of litigation, vindictive litigation, or even physical violence on the part of Trump and his supporters. I myself have gotten numerous death threats. In fact, I somewhat sympathize with Dr. Blasey Ford because I received some of that. For about a month in January, I was enclosed in my home and could only go out in disguise. Yes, it was quite stressful.
Did you see anybody following you or anything? Or
I received close to 1,000 threats per day. Some
per
of them,
day?
Death threats, yes.
Did you tell the Yale police about that, or who did
I
you?
did.
Yeah.
And I was told to report to the FBI. I was about to, but then it died down after a month. During that time, I gained 20 pounds and lost a lot of hair.
Wow.
But
now, meanwhile, the White House has never officially commented you were against this movement, right? Or he's on Twitter yelling you out or anything?
No, other than Trump tweeting out a book in opposition of our book the day it was released.
Oh, okay.
But nothing threatening.
Okay. Brett Kavanaugh went to law school there as well, and you've sort of looked into that case as well, right?
Well, my group actually put out a statement, request on the part of the FBI while the investigation was going on, and to the senators of the Judicial Committee, that from his Senate hearing that Thursday, when both Dr. Blasey Ford and Mr. Kavanaugh were giving their testimonies, that he exhibited signs that were very concerning, psychological signs of impairment. And what he showed were poor regulation of emotion, evasion of questions, and exaggerated entitlement, which actually makes someone more likely to be capable of violating others' rights. Those alone wouldn't have been so alarming, but he also showed signs of paranoid ideations, conspiracy theories, and an inability to have empathy. And these are concerning signs in terms of capacity to serve in a function as important as Supreme Court justice. So we were actually asking for a mental health examination and also a substance abuse evaluation because
he likes beer.
Yes, and but the manner of answering questions, he was showing denial and annoyance by criticism about his drinking. These are actually symptoms, psychological symptoms of alcohol use disorder. He also had some visible signs of rosacea that could be caused by many things, but among them is excessive drinking, and early onset of drinking can lead to substance alcohol dependence later in life, so he's at great risk of still being affected by an alcohol use disorder. And we felt that it was important to rule these things out in order to confirm his capacity to serve.
Let me ask you, was it underlying this or your, where you felt legitimate that you could raise these kind of issues is because this adds up, I don't have a judicial temperament?
Well, I think that's more for the judicial or legal
committee?
People to assess. That would be...
But I mean, in other words, obviously, all the judges in this country aren't going through that, right?
Yes.
What you're saying, that kind of a character mental health checkup. So you're saying that, if Kavanaugh should go through that, this is something that should happen to judges, or...
I don't know if all judges are going through that. I don't think so.
No, they're not, I guess.
Right.
What I'm saying is,
right.
is if you think this leads to him not having the right temperament for the job, is that why you would have done it? You said no, but then what's the basis for this?
So it's not temperament, but mental capacity to serve. Yeah. So it's somewhat like fitness for duty.
Fitness, okay.
And
even though he's a judge right now, you realize, so he's actually serving the role for a while.
Exactly, but we don't know if he's really serving in a capacity that fulfills. We have a president right now who seems to show obvious signs of unfitness, and yet so these are things that perhaps mental health professionals can point out, because it's very difficult for the normal individual to distinguish normal signs, normal personality variations, or healthy variations from actual pathology. And it's the pathology that we would be worried about, because to put someone in a position where they're actually serving and yet bring their mental impairments to the job could be detrimental, especially in a position such as a Supreme Court justice or judge, where lives depend on the role.
All right, we'll be back with more with Bandy Lee. We're going to talk fear next. Our guest, Dr. Bandy Lee, assistant clinical professor in law. She's taught at the law school at Yale for 15 years. What's paranoid ideation?
It is feelings of persecution, exaggeration of threats where they don't exist, an overreaction to an inability to just see reality for what it is. And
do you think that was the real him on that Thursday, or that Trump had told them go in there and deny everything forcefully?
I'm sure Trump had an influence, but what we saw was someone under stress, and what can appear in response to stress, and we saw that he was unable to stay with reality.
Let me ask you this. Let's say he was innocent, okay? So his whole reputation has been tattered, and et cetera. Would that response justify that if he was innocent, or even if in his own mind he'd convinced himself he was innocent? Would that kind of an overreaction be justified?
Well, there's an overreaction to, there's kind of a normal overreactive response versus a pathological one. Okay. And what we saw was actually outside of normal, and those are the things such as conspiracy theories and inability to think of any other version other than one's own, and unable to think of the other person's perspective.
Are you let's say now that he was guilty, if he had said, I was 18 years old, I was wrong, I was drunk, I apologize, there's no excuse for this, could he have gotten away with that and still been...
In terms of capacity, yes, that would be the more normal response.
Right, and but I mean, would he have been approved by the Senate Judiciary Committee?
I think those are criteria that are up to the Senate Judiciary Committee, and not really within the realm of mental health. I'm speaking more about mental health and mental capacity.
Right. But what I'm saying is, I'm Brett Kavanaugh, and I'm going to be honest. Okay, it happened, but I was a kid, I was drunk, blah, 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 blah. He's now told the truth. But if he told the truth, wouldn't he be disqualifying himself for the position?
Not necessarily. We would do a risk assessment. So whether he's violent now, prone to violence now, or whether he endorses violence, so is likely to promote laws that encourage violence. Right. Those are the kinds of things.
So if he had said, I was a kid and I got drunk, it was a mistake, he might have still been approved, which would say he should tell the truth then if he.
Right, if he doesn't have violent risks now.
Right, I understand the rest. I mean, the pathologies are there. I mean, that's clearly what you've seen. I'm just trying to, ascertain if it's realistic to expect him to tell the truth when it probably would disqualify him. But maybe the truth wouldn't disqualify him.
Well, we saw that he was unable to. He was unable to even consider the possibility, and he has been revealed on numerous occasions to have lied.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what are examples of his lying?
I think from the report that you showed, from the calendar that he revealed alone, he was trying to convince that he couldn't have been drinking, and even within the calendar itself, there were examples of
during the week,
being out drinking. Yes.
Do you find Dr. Ford to have been credible?
I found her very credible, yes.
Okay, so when people say, "Oh, you don't remember how much you had to drink, how you got there, how you got home, who one person was at the party," you would say
that makes her more credible because the ability to admit what one knows and doesn't know, that actually makes her extremely reliable because she's able to distinguish between what she can say and cannot say. And not to remember some of those details are actually very consistent with someone who has been traumatized.
Yeah, I'm told that what happens is your brain hyper-focuses on the trauma, and she remembers every detail, but the rest becomes kind of like a blur.
Yes.
And she didn't tell anybody initially, which is also fairly normal.
Yes, some people describe it as tunnel vision.
Yeah.
You focus in on certain aspects that are just blazoned into your memory. Other details blur because of your intense state at the time.
Okay, so she seems very credible. He seemed way overreacting, plus exhibiting some pathological signs. The FBI does this investigation. There was another guy in the room, Mark Judge, and they found no corroboration of her story. Did the FBI do a real investigation then?
They didn't do anything that we expected, which was first to interview Mr. Kavanaugh and Dr. Blasey Ford. Their testimonies do not count as actual investigative interviews, so I'm actually not sure who they interviewed and what they were investigating.
I have to say that I just interviewed somebody who was at Yale. Oh yes, yeah, a software engineer from Apple who was at Yale at the same time, right? But did not know him, but had heard that it was, the behavior at Yale was true. Certainly the Mrs. Ramirez case, which I'm sure you know.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to believe that none of this has come out. Does it make you cynical about the system that he sort of lied his way onto the Supreme Court?
Well, certainly it's a very, very odd situation, and one. I teach a bunch of law students, and I was also giving a talk at Denver School of Law over the weekend, and many lawyers and law students are now despondent because they went into their field because they trusted in the law, and they believed in its legitimacy, and now they cannot even trust the highest court in the land. But I think, a lot of this could be mitigated by requiring capacity to serve evaluation, a mental health evaluation of all Supreme Court justices, as we're advocating for all presidents and presidential and vice presidential candidates now and into the future. I think the current appointments, the current leaders right now, the president and Mr. Kavanaugh, are exemplary of this critical need that while we give fitness for duty exams, psychological testing to the most mundane jobs, toxic waste removal, police officers, where only a few lives may be at stake. But here we have individuals in whose hands millions of lives are dependent, and yet we do not apply this examination. It's not something that can be substituted by campaigns, by Senate judiciary hearings. It really has to be a separate examination that rigorously tests capacity to serve. And capacity evaluations are just standard procedures that are applied to the job in question. And so they're done every day by hundreds of mental health professionals around the country. There is no reason why we should exempt these important, extremely powerful positions from this examination.
All right, we'll be back with more with Bandy Lee. We're going to talk fear next. Our guest, Dr. Bandy Lee, assistant clinical professor in law. She's taught at the law school at Yale for 15 years. Let me ask you this, and I've asked you this before. You talk about this prone inevitably to violence at some point coming out of his personality disorders. But the only example we have so far is that he went from threatening Kim Jong-un, brutal threats, to actually try to make peace with him. Does that speak against violent tendencies?
Actually, violent individuals are not necessarily aggressive all the time. In fact, they can be very acquiescent, especially to someone like a brutal dictator. And so I would not say that that is any sign of lessening of his violent tendencies. In fact, I think in sum total, it actually encourages violence because he's legitimizing and affirming violence in another despot and allying with him in a way that could lead to other kinds of wars and nuclear wars. Perhaps, even his alliance with Vladimir Putin. We may make peace with Russia, but we could be escalating greater possibility of nuclear war with Russia against some other country. And so what mental health professionals look at are the underlying tendencies and psychological causes of behavior. So violence itself is usually an end product of a long process. The long process is already there. We can predict in terms of probability that his character will lead to greater violence, not less. And we already see that in many of his policies, even. The traumatization of thousands of children, the encampments, the trade wars that are destabilizing the world, his restructuring the geopolitical landscape so that it's all more threatening and antagonistic, leading to greater possibility of war. Domestically, he has stoked civil strife, and white supremacist killings have doubled, gun murders have soared. This is all a natural consequence of the psychological mindset that is actually affecting the culture.
I just think it's hard to grasp this violence, thing, because people don't assume that, and as you know, everybody was saying this guy's going to nuke North Korea, he's going to get in a war with North Korea, it's who's got the biggest what, all that kind of stuff. And then he's gone the opposite way. And people, so
the fact that hasn't happened, it could happen any day, by the way.
Right.
He could reverse at any time.
Right. But will you say that at all that you were surprised he's doing this and that it's a good thing he's talking?
Am I surprised that he's talking? No.
Even after all the threats and the feelings that we're going to get into a nuclear war with this guy because of Trump?
Because we can always, at any time, go into nuclear war. That's still a threat.
Was it good that he did it? Was it good that he's talking?
Yes.
And that didn't surprise you?
And I credit President Moon Jae-in a great deal for that.
Yes.
It's not to Trump's credit.
Okay, let's talk fear. Bob Woodward's book came out and presents a case of basically total chaos and dysfunction. I don't know if you've read the book or not. I want to ask you, is what you've heard about coming out of the White House consistent with what you'd expect of Donald Trump? There's all this chaos and stuff. And the second part of that question is, I think you've said publicly that you've actually had people from the White House come to you to kind of say they're worried about this guy.
Yes, that's right. I've read about half the book, but none of it has been surprising to me, nor has the earlier book, Fire and Fury by Michael Wolff, nor has the New York Times op-ed by the anonymous White House official. None of this has been surprising to any of us. We've been predicting that this kind of conditions in the White House, in the country, around the world, will be effectuated by his psychology. And again, since as mental health professionals, we look at the underlying psychology and the causes of behavior and after effects. In fact, when it comes from mental impairment or pathology, it's almost inevitable because these individuals are rather rigid. They're not as able to make choices or change their behavior as healthy individuals can.
This anonymous op-ed that was sent into the New York Times, and you obviously don't know who it was either. Do you have a sense this is somebody that's rather high in the White House that would do this? Number one, and do you have a sense that, and you wouldn't know this, but I wonder, if the person is, there's a lot of people that are worried about his agenda, even in his own administration. And that's a bias, obviously. So that it might be someone that's more worried about his agenda than his mental capacity. What do you?
Well, most people will think in terms of normal terms, such as an agenda, policy, strategy.
Right.
But from our perspective, we distinguish those things, which are normal activities, from mental compulsion,
right.
And this strong pull to work in ways that appear effective because it's actually pathology that can be overwhelming and defy any rational or logical attempt to contain. And it can actually be more effective than strategy because it simply overwhelms and overruns any ability to contain. That is why mental impairment can be actually dangerous, and the treatment of it is severe containment. In fact, you have to be quite brutal in terms of containment. Containment, limit setting, removal from access to weapons, and removal from power. And of course, we're doing the exact opposite. We're enabling illness, and we're allowing the pathology, in fact, to spread. And this is very dangerous for our country, for humankind, because of the level of power he has access to.
I would just like to know that Anonymous was not coming from policy strategy differences first, and using the mental illness as a cover for that, as opposed to being more objective.
I think he illustrates how hard
you think it's
it
a
is. Sorry, he or she. The White House officials who contacted me were he's.
Okay. By the way, you won't release their names, obviously, but were they high levels?
I didn't ask, but they came across as such.
Did they, and were they coming from agenda or mental illness issue?
Mental illness issues.
And
they were clearly, they were certain that this was mental health related. That was why they were contacted.
So let's talk about that for a second, because obviously people can say, oh, you're anti-Trump, you're biased, you're whatever, but these are guys that work for him and came to you, who was not viewed as,
Right.
Okay.
And I would describe myself as pro-Trump, pro-humanity, pro-health. Because I'm really not talking about Trump as a person, as in terms of his political views or ideology, so forth. In fact, I'm not sure he can even get there. He cannot even get to his own person because of the pathology.
Okay, but these people that came to you were obviously pro-Trump. They worked for him. They worked for him. So they think they're doing a public service by warning, in essence, they feel they have a duty to warn?
I don't think they were warning as much as calling for help. They were frightened by him. They said that his behavior was frightening them. They thought he was mentally unraveling. And since they knew about my book and knew that I would be someone who could perhaps
How do they think
help
he's
them.
unraveling? In what way? Because, you talked about a rigid person. To me, he's looked like he's behaved like this for 40 years.
That's right.
You can go through self-destructive from the USFL Football League that he personally destroyed, the bankruptcies or whatever. So this looks like more of the same to me.
And all the aggressive vindications he has made through litigating people.
Right.
When you have access to power, he had money and legal means. You don't have to punch
intimidate.
out a guy to...
Right. Okay, but today, why is he unraveling worse than what he's been doing forever?
Because of the stress of the presidency.
But in other words, they feel that he's actually different than the nut that he appeared to be forever, you know?
Right. They thought, well, they were having personal experiences with him. But in terms of his further unraveling, that's to be expected if you enable an illness and give someone more power. Mm-hmm. And of course, the stresses of the Mueller investigation.
So being president, in other words, is causing
yes, and the criticism and the kind of scrutiny he's receiving and not getting the feedback he wishes, which is unconditional adulation. And so all these things are stressful.
We'll come back with our final segment. All right, we're back with Bandy Lee, who teaches both at the law school and the School of Medicine at Yale still?
That's right.
Okay. I want to ask you about Dr. Ford one more thing, and whether this is sort of sadistic or whatever, but right after she testified, he said that he found her very credible and she's a good woman. Then he's off in front of a rally, I think in Iowa, saying, you know, all the stuff about her. She only had one beer. She didn't know how she got there. You know, she's ruining this guy's reputation. Appeared to be a completely, opposing to what he had just said. Is that just because he's throwing red meat to his base that was in that meeting?
That would be strategic thinking. He's not as strategic as one would conclude, because that's within normalcy. And what you're seeing here is his capitulating or his sensing what he needs to say in order to...
Right. So one of those two things he's saying is a lie, right? One that she's credible.
So when he's saying she is credible, he's actually either capitulating or sensing what people want to hear or need to hear, or he's being told he should say that.
Okay.
Versus you can see the intense, enthusiastic projection of how she's...
So you think he means it then when he's out?
In the rallies? Yes, I think he's in his element.
He has an insatiable need for love almost, right?
Yes.
And he's in the wrong profession for that. In today's world, especially when we're so polarized, 50% hate you.
That's right.
Is he in the wrong job then for trying to get what he's trying to get mentally, or?
I think he was actually surprised by that. He thought that once he became president, he would be
as popular as Putin is.
Yes, and that's why he wishes to go there to censor all media, news outlets, and to control others' opinion of him.
Okay, so you think he's unfit for office, that there should be fitness tests for candidates for that office as well as for the Supreme Court. Should he be removed from office in your mind, and how should it be done if so? First of all,
fitness for duty is to do a valid examination. Takes a whole series of tests.
You don't buy that test that his doctor did on him. It is physical.
No, that was smoke and mirrors attempt.
He could draw a camel or something, or
just like the FBI investigation, it was a sham test. First of all, the doctor is not an independent doctor who is working for the president and also
physician,
under the president as commander in chief. And the screen he did is a 10-minute screen that even patients with frank Alzheimer's disease can score within normal, and those who are hospitalized with schizophrenia have also scored normal range. So it's really not a good sensitivity test. And what he needed was a mental health evaluation by a professional. He has no mental health credentials. He's an emergency room doctor. He should have made these things clear, and he didn't.
Okay, should he be removed from office, and how?
Going back to unfitness, what we're saying is that he shows every sign of being unfit and should be tested. But to conclude unfitness requires examination. So we're advocating for a full evaluation. Of course, avoiding an evaluation in itself is a warning sign. If he cared about the country and if he were responding to all the concerns that have come up, he would subject himself to full evaluation. But of course, that hasn't happened.
You talked about the fact that he needs to undergo tests first. Impeachment is a political process.
I believe every political process could be informed by expert opinion because, especially because this is a mental health issue. Of course, many things fall under impeachment, so I really wouldn't speak to the political process, but recently I was asked to speak about the 25th Amendment in Washington, and several Congress members attended. One Congress member was extremely concerned about an unfit president having access to the nuclear codes and feeling helpless about the fact that we didn't have any measure for responding to this clear threat. And what I said was that as a mental health professional, I cannot really comment on the 25th Amendment or impeachment, but what I can say is that as an expert consultant, legal decisions such as disability, incompetence, or unfitness for duty, these are all legal decisions, but no court would ever think of making these conclusions without expert input. And we have a situation here where we have a national mental health crisis. It's clearly mental health related. For them to say that they do not need mental health input because this is a political decision, I think is incorrect. And to go into a decision blindly or without being informed, without informing the public, is predisposes this to partisan struggle or power play rather than a valid intervention because of an actual concern. No president so far has shown such alarming signs that require an evaluation, perhaps immediate removal before an evaluation. This has been an urgency, and yet it has not happened. The fact that we don't have a nuclear war now should not be a reason for
overlooking.
Yes, for complacency, given the risks.
Defrauding, manipulating, cheating.
He's able to project this image. So this is a facade that he is projecting.
Does he believe it, though?
I believe so to a certain extent, because he's not able to get by without believing it. It's literally intolerable for him to think otherwise. And so I do believe he himself believes most of the lies he's telling. And therefore, it's an emotional compulsion. It's a necessity for him. The problem is when this crumbles, we do not know what the repercussions will be. He's projected this grandiose self to the world as the best in everything, the expert in everything, and the only person who can solve the country's and the world's problems. And here his facade is crumbling. This is actually a very dangerous moment, because this is when the self-image crumbles. It's like the whole world is gone for him. So to launch a nuclear war to destroy the entire human civilization would be nothing for him. In fact, it will be desirable, because if he crumbles, the rest of the world would come with him.
Wow. Thank you, Bandy.
Attention small business owners. Growing your business can be tough. Just when you thought you were making money, you found out that you owe the government money. And now that you owe the IRS their cut of your business profits, you may be broke. And if you don't take things seriously, you could go to jail or have your business shut down. But you do have an option. If the IRS is threatening you for unpaid taxes, call the Tax Resources Network. Their tax professionals and ex-IRS agents have over 23 years of experience dealing with the IRS, saving business owners and the self-employed millions in tax dollars. Let us negotiate with the IRS on your behalf. We may be able to reduce your tax debt for a lot less than you owe, help with the IRS audit, and even criminal investigations. If your business owes the IRS $15,000 or more and the IRS is threatening you, don't wait and let your business get shut down or worse. Call for a free consultation. Call 800-910-4980. 800-910-4980. That's 800-910-4980. Again, 800-910-4980.